Hey guys, I'm Jim. I edit photos. Thanks for stopping by. Today I'm in Luminar AI and we are talking about the curves tool. I mentioned this in a previous video about the light tool and how curves is complicated, perhaps, advanced, super powerful, things like that, and told you I'd do a deep dive on it. Here it is. So let's get into it. Here's a photo, and the curves tool, which is right there, is at the bottom of the light tool. So click on light and you just go straight to curves, and there you go. Now, I've also got the histogram displaying because in the curves tool, you'll notice there's a histogram in the background. Curves is incredibly powerful. It gives you massive control over light, shadow, which is contrast, right? And of course, color as well. It is arguably the most powerful tool that there is. But I think it scares a lot of people. And I'll admit, when I first started editing photos, I've shied away from the curves tool. I was like, nah, I don't know about that. It seems a little crazy. I don't know what all these things do and how to do it and why to do it or whatever. So I didn't do it. Now I do it, and it's pretty handy actually. So and the truth is, it's not really that scary. You're not going to break anything. Everything is going to be cool. Let's go take a look at it. And the reason I have the histogram up here because this histogram essentially kind of mirrors that. If you're not familiar with the histogram, you may want to go read about it, but basically it shows you the distribution of light in the photo. And it's good to have here because we are going to be manipulating the light. So there's a line here, and we're just going to start with this. In this upper right corner, that dot, you can move it around and things will happen when you do that. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the bottom left, you can move that around and things will happen when you do that. And you'll also notice the histogram is changing. And then you've got these three dots down here as well, which you can move around and they will impact the photo and that sort of thing. I'm going to hit reset so I can show you kind of how you can use this tool to help you edit your photos. So first thing first, most people do what's called an S curve, so the shape of the letter S. And what they'll do is they'll drop a little bit of a point there. By the way, this upper right corner, that represents highlights. This bottom left corner represents shadows, and anything in between is various differences. From the bottom left, it's darker. As you get towards the middle, you approach the midtones, and as you get in the upper right corner, you approach the highlights. But a lot of people will drop a couple of points like that, and these are called control points or anchor points. And basically what they'll do is they'll lift this a little bit, and then they'll pull this down a little bit. And basically, as you can see, I've got a little bit of a S shape, hence the term S curve. But if you look at my photo, there it is before, a little bit flatter, a little bit less punchy in the colors, and after, definitely not flat, higher contrast, and the colors pop. Now, I didn't do anything to colors, but that's a key thing to be aware of, and that is that contrast changes also impact how the colors look. Now you can drop up to 10 of these little anchor points or control points anywhere along this line and move them as you see fit. So by the way, you can always double click to reset it back to unedited. Just double click any of those dots. If you want to manipulate highlights, if you move this one, that's really popping the highlights. And if you move it this way, it's darkening the highlights. And the opposite is true on this end. Shadows, if I go like this, I'm darkening the shadows. See how that's impacting the contrast of the image? Because remember, contrast is the difference between the dark and the light. And I think contrast in a photo looks good, right? The opposite, of course, of moving it that way is moving it this way. And there I'm losing contrast. I'm kind of brightening the photo because I'm brightening the shadows, but I'm also kind of fading it out. And a lot of people, when they create kind of faded or vintage, kind of matte looks, that's what you can do to do that, is basically just take the shadows and lift them here in the curves tool and impact the photo accordingly. Now coming over here, these three dots also represent shadows and midtones and highlights respectively. So shadows, I can drag it this way and I'm darkening those shadows, but I can't go any further left. So if I want to lighten the shadows, I got to go with that little dot there. Here it is, midtones. I love to use this. This is great. You can just drag the midtones to the right, which is going to darken them. And you can see, by the way, the curve tool is starting to bow down a little bit in the center. So when I go like this, it's bowing more and more. And of course, the photo is getting darker. And conversely, if I go to the left, I'm lifting the midtones. It's kind of bowing outward, kind of brightening the overall histogram. And just like on the curves on that line, you can double click that to reset it. And then here I've got highlights, and so if I drag these to the left, I'm basically popping those highlights. So some people might come in and do that, maybe do a little bit with the midtones, maybe do a little bit with the shadows. And I've got a punchier, kind of more high contrast image. Let me show you the before and after. There it is, before and after. Not a major difference. It's fairly subtle, but it's punchier. And so just using these sliders and not even touching the tone curve itself, I've been able to make a pretty nice impact on my photo. Let me hit reset once again. And now you'll also notice that if you drop these anchor points and then start moving like this, let's say you drop another one here, this point here that I set is actually kind of anchoring this upper section, because without that point, I start getting more of that curve moving in the upward direction. So let me hit reset on that. And if I put a curve here to kind of anchor that, when I move this, I'm isolating a little bit more condensed section of the highlights. And I can do the same down here because, let me put a dot there, because I've got this point anchoring, I can either lift or drop the shadows. And again, it consolidates or concentrates, is a better word, that movement in a smaller area of the tones, right? And so you can drop various points in here in order to anchor sections of the photo and basically isolate them a little bit more than if you just come in here and say, oh, I want to lift up some of these highlights. You do that and the whole thing starts moving. But if you anchor it like that and have a few anchors here, when you start moving these sections, you're getting a little bit finer control over what's happening, and more specifically, you're able to target certain areas of the photo where those adjustments are occurring. So it's a great way to really control how the contrast, the light, the highlights, the shadows, all that stuff is kind of playing across your photo by dropping multiple anchor points and moving up or down, within them. It just gives you much finer control. And I should be clear about this, there's no right way to do it. Some people will come in here and use the tone curve, put an S curve and be done. Some will drop a bunch of anchor points, move them around, and others might come in and just say, like what I did earlier, hey, I want a little bit more contrast, I want to pull down the highlights a little bit, and maybe I want to bump up the midtones, and I'm done. And it's not a bad looking change. There it is before, and there it is after. A little bit brighter in the sky, which kind of makes visual sense. The sky is going to be brighter than the foreground, and a little bit more contrast, a little bit of pop in color. All that is basically just an example of how you can use the tool. But the key point here is experiment, have fun, just check it out, play around with it, because it will give you a lot of control over your photo. And I will admit, I don't use it a ton. I try to use it more often, but I haven't included it in a lot of videos. So if you would like me to do some videos where I'm editing a photo using just the tone curve, let me know, because I'm happy to do that. Again, it's a lot of power. There's a lot of control. And like I said, you get massive and targeted powerful control over the light and the distribution of it. But I also said you get target control over colors. So if you notice these 4 dots here, this first one is basically the light. I'm impacting the highlights, the shadows, the midtones, which is the contrast. But I get over here, you can see the line changes. There's a red line here, there's a green line, and there is a blue line. Well, let me show you the color wheel. Okay, here's the color wheel, and the color wheel is not something I'm an expert in, but I can point out a couple of simple things, which is red and cyan are on opposite sides of the color wheel, and colors that are opposite each other are considered complementary. Green and magenta are the same. Blue and yellow are the same. So note when you start editing, here's the red, and I'm just going to drag the midtones and make a point. If I go this way, I'm getting more red, but if I go that way, I'm getting more cyan. And remember, red and cyan are opposite each other on the color wheel. So this is something to think about while you're editing. These color tabs all represent those colors. So again, here, green or more magenta. And again, green and magenta are opposite each other on the color wheel. And then of course, blue and yellow, which you saw on the color wheel, are opposite each other. Same thing here. So I can get more blue or I can get more yellow. So to go back to the red, you could do the same kind of thing. You could put a couple of control points in here and do kind of an interesting color kind of look like that, where you get a little bit of a bicolor toning look by adjusting and putting an S curve here on just the red. But if you don't want to do that, maybe you go to green and do the same thing. Maybe I don't want any green actually, but you can come in and add a bit of magenta to this sunset, and that looks pretty okay as well. And then of course you can do the same with blue, where you might come in and do a little bit of blue and maybe a little bit of yellow. And again, just creating custom looks to your color by adjusting these 3 different color sections in the curves tool gives you a lot of power and control. And if you don't have something like this was just something I found on the web a few years ago, and I refer to it in some videos, but it's a great way to recognize what the different colors are and how they operate. And by the way, let me show you something else in Luminar that will also help you remember this. If I scroll down and I go to color harmony and then I go to color balance, Let me bring this color wheel back. Take a look at that. Cyan and red. Hey, there's cyan and red. Here's magenta and green. There's magenta and green. And there's yellow and blue, yellow and blue. And so I'm going to do a deep dive on color harmony. I'll get to that soon. But I wanted to point out, if you weren't familiar with the color wheel and those opposite complementary colors, they're actually here in Luminar in the color balance section of color harmony. So I'm back up here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go do a simple little edit on this photo with the curves tool just to see kind of what I come up with. And, you know, I'm kind of winging it here, admittedly. I'm just kind of playing around, but I want to get a little bit of red, I think. I want to pull a little bit into that sunset, maybe a little bit on the highlights with that, and maybe here in the midtones, maybe do a little bit of blue. Maybe something about like that. So not a major edit, but if I turn this off, there's the before and the after. And if I show you this slider, you know, I would probably experiment with a little bit more. I don't think that's exactly what I would do, but mostly I just wanted to show you that you can come in here and drop control points on all of these different tabs and adjust them within the same photo and have a very powerful impact on your photo without even going to any other tools in Luminar. It's that powerful, it's very comprehensive, and it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you edit your photos. And again, there's no specific way, there's no, oh, always do this or always do that. Just keep in mind the color wheel and experiment and play around with the various dots that I've talked about and the sliders. And you can use it on any kind of photo. I'm going to show you a couple of more quick examples. So here's a street scene in a city. So a cityscape, blue hour shot. I think I would come in and do a little bit of a gentle S-curve. For the reds, I don't know if I'm going to do anything with the red. Yeah, maybe I'll do a little bit of that cyan because I kind of like that. And then with the green, I might do a tiny bit of magenta. And then with the blue overall, I think I might add a little bit of blue to the photo. And let me just show you what I started with. There it is, and there it is now. And this was super quick and super easy. And as you saw, I was just experimenting. I don't necessarily approach a photo and say, I have to do this with the curves tool or, you know, it's going to be terrible. It's just experimentation and fun. But I made a huge impact on the contrast and the color tones. I mean, the street is darker. The colors have been shifted. There's just a lot you can do in a photo with this tool. And there's also a couple of other things that are kind of weird. One I showed in a previous video, but let me hit reset and show you one other thing that you can do. That's kind of fun, very different, a little bit weird, and that is the tone curve represents light. So you can take the highlights all the way up and then the shadows all the way down, and you get what's called an inverted curve. I did a video about that a while back if you want to check it out. Kind of weird, kind of funky, kind of space age, but it's kind of fun. You can also, by the way, take them both up and then do a V-shaped curve, and that kind of gives you what's called a solarization effect. It's weird, it's different, but it's kind of fun. And then you can still go in and add other filters and make adjustments accordingly. But those are a couple things you can do. It's definitely not something I would do on every photo, but it's kind of fun. And whenever you've seen those kind of weird solarization effects, that's how they're doing that. I can also show you how curves may work gently on a portrait. Let me go get that one. Okay, here's a photo I downloaded from Unsplash, and this is just going to be a really gentle S-curve, but I just want to show you how you can impact the light. Notice how the shadow is coming in stronger on her face because there's a little bit of shadow there, and by dragging this down, I'm increasing that. So if you look at the before and the after, I've done nothing else except a slight curve, and you can see how that's impacting the photo. The other thing I might do is go to blue and maybe pull a little bit of blue into the photo, and that's creating a little bit less warmth because I'm adding blue, which is the opposite of yellow. So there's a lot of yellow in this photo if you look at the before, and by adjusting the blue midtones, I'm dragging away from the yellow toward the blue, and I'm softening that up and making it look a little bit more pink and that sort of thing. So let me hit reset on that and show you the before. You can see how yellow it was, and I just went in and took the midtones and just made them a bit bluer, and that's kind of softening up that yellow look, which I personally didn't like, but again, it's all down to personal preference, and that's the power and the fun, frankly, that you can have with the curves tool. Amazing control and power over the distribution of light, which is going to be midtones, highlights, shadows, and therefore contrast, because the interplay of those three elements is going to impact contrast. But then also you've got those three tabs, the red, the green, and the blue. You've heard people say RGB, red, green, blue. That's what these are, red, green, and blue. And then throwing in the whole idea of the color wheel and how that operates with the opposite complementary colors is something to think about, because Again, with curves, so much power, so much control over color and light. It's really an amazing tool, and I encourage you to play around with it. You don't have to use it all the time. It's not something that's required. All these other sliders in tools like Luminar do a lot of the same things, and sometimes, frankly, they're quite a bit easier, especially the AI sliders. But I think personally, learning how this operates is a great way to really understand the distribution of light and color in a photo. And it gives you, I think, a more practiced eye for your editing. And if nothing else, it's kind of fun to learn and experiment with the new tools. So if you haven't, I encourage you to check it out, experiment and have fun, do whatever you want, move buttons around and just have fun with it because it is powerful. And I think understanding it is really helpful to better understand how your edits across the entire photo are being applied and how they're impacting your final result. That's a Curves deep dive. Hope it gave you maybe some tips, some tricks, some ideas, some things maybe you didn't know, and that sort of thing. If you have comments, don't hesitate to leave them down below. I'll see you soon, my friends. I'll see you in the very next video, which is coming soon. As you may know, I'm cranking them out at a fairly rapid pace and having fun with it. So thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Have fun editing. I'll see you in the next one, and adios.